hate. Let me tell you how much I've come to hate since I began to play this game. There are 387.44 million computer games lining the shelves of the Steam store. If the word hate was engraved on each nanoangstrom of those hundreds of millions of games, it would not equal one billionth of the hate I feel for this game at this micro-instant. Hate! Hate!
Hello, welcome to a review of I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, a game I don't hate, actually kind of like it a bit, but I sort of hate it a lot. This is a game that does everything I hate in terms of point and click foibles, but it also has one of the most interesting settings and stories I can think of. This is a weird one, guys, in multiple ways.
Why was I programmed to feel pain?
Explain to viewers what your publicists have told me about you. You were born in Cleveland, Ohio. You've been a lumberjack, a fisherman, a crop picker, a hired gunman, a truck driver, a cook, a salesman, an actor, editor, writer of novels, short stories and screenplays, and apparently you're also a generalized all-round gadfly to the establishment. What's more, say your publicists, you're 5'5", blue-eyed, dark, and have an explosive personality, a devastating wit, and the sort of almost frightening articulacy, can't even say that word, that has made you a favourite guest on TV chat shows. Now, how would you see yourself?
I'd wonder how they omitted mentioning that I was responsible for World War II.
For those unaware, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream is a science fiction classic by Harlan Ellison, published back in 1967. It tells the tale of a vicious, tortuous supercomputer, originally called Allied Master Computer. It now simply goes by the name of AM. In the belly of this supercomputer, the last vestiges of humankind are held captive and consistently tortured by AM for reasons that aren't immediately clear, other than the fact that AM hates humanity. There's no real rhyme or reason to the characters AM has chosen for this endless torture, considering he nuked the shit out of everyone else, but that just kind of adds to the helpless misery of the tale in general. To cut a long story short, the entrapped humans are on a quest to find food, but when they get there, they realise the food is canned and they don't have a can opener, so they kill each other, or rather one of the humans kills the others because he realises this is the only way out of this endless torture. And this really annoys Am because he's such a cheery fellow to begin with, turning the one surviving human into a jelly-like creature that has its perception of time constantly altered, just to, you know, be a bit more annoying. This is where the title of the book comes from. Being a harmless jelly blob, the final human has no mouth, and he really wants to do a big scream. So that's the book, but Ellison wanted to adapt the book into a game, which is a little odd, as Ellison himself claims he wasn't a fan of computer games and didn't even own a computer. The game was then developed by Cyberdreams, who were also responsible for not a great deal, most notably Darkseid and Darkseid 2, which fell within the same wheelhouse as I Have No Mouth, in so much that they were point-and-click adventure games with a psychological horror bent. The other game they made was Cyber Race, which, I'm gonna guess, wasn't very psychologically horror-y. Reviews at the time were a mixed bag, though leaning more toward good than bad, with the good reviews citing the unsettling tale here as a rather standout moment for point-and-click adventure games, and the bad reviews complaining about, well, mostly everything else, and that's understandable, having played through the game. I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream almost becomes an incomprehensible metaphor of itself, leaving you struggling for an eternity just to try and see even a single one of the game's 7 different endings. Spoiler alert, I got the bad ending. We start the game with the famous quote from the book, and one thing you'll likely notice straight away is the voice acting for Am feels a little underwhelming, a little odd.
Hate. Let me tell you how much I've come to hate you since I began to live. There are 387.44 million miles of printed circuits in wafer-thin layers that fill my complex.
Now, I've heard some people say that this voice is excellent, that the vitriol of Am is conveyed perfectly by this voice actor, but to me he comes off as a little bit light-footed, a little fancy-free. Looking further into it, the voice is none other than Harlan Ellison himself, which goes some way to explain the conundrum. Yes, he wrote the book, so we should be in a position to say, well, he wrote it, he should know what Am sounds like, but on the other hand, he's not a voice actor. He's not a voice actor, and bizarrely, he's the only voice actor credited in the entire game. This game features multiple voice actors, most of which are better than Harlan himself. Anyway, we're given the choice of 5 different characters to choose from, each of which is sent to a sort of virtual realm that Am has cooked up for them. A torture world specifically designed for each individual character, with the task of solving the world in order to be set free by Am. Which doesn't happen because Am is a dick. Gorister is our first protagonist. The story here immediately gives you an indication of just how abstract this game is going to get. Gorister feels guilty about his wife being sent into a mental institute, and so you initially find yourself on a Zeppelin, of course. A Zeppelin that's powered by your own heart, which is attached to the front of the Zeppelin. Once you figure out how to land the thing, you find that you were murdered by your mother and father-in-law. There's a jackal that says he's similar to Am, but not Am, and in order to find your comatose wife and your bitch of a mother-in-law, you have to flush a toilet 3 times in order to enter a meat locker.
A meat locker? How'd I get...
Great question.
Working out how this abstract world of metaphors works is an ordeal in itself, and it's not helped by a pretty cumbersome UI. Finding doorways, for instance, isn't always quite so obvious, and you'll be hovering your mouse around the edge of the screen a lot to work out how to get back to certain places, or find new places in their entirety. You also need to specifically press use when opening doors, which doesn't sound like a big deal, but it's these little niggles that slow down your movement from place to place. You also can't speed up any animations by double clicking, so I don't know, enjoy the scenery while you're taking long walks, I guess. It was during this first scenario that I discovered my hatred of I Must Scream's gameplay. For anyone who's watched my previous videos on point-and-click adventure games, you'll know that one of the things I really dislike is being cock-blocked by the game. I don't find any fun in either constantly saving the game to make sure I don't die, or failing that, having to replay an entire segment again in order to get back to where I was. It's not the same as, say, a game based on dexterity where you get better and try again. In most cases, you'll be doing the exact same things all over again to get back to where you are. In Gorister's tale, I'd come across some milky liquid, don't ask, and on trying to release my mother-in-law from a meat hook, don't ask, she grabbed hold of my head and wouldn't let go until I'd given her a taste of my sweet, sweet milk. So I did, and then she got super strength and ran off. I went to find her, and she was in the cockpit of the Zeppelin, bitching about the fact she couldn't get it to start. And then I wandered, and wandered, and wandered, until eventually I just walked off into the desert and died, and that was apparently not the thing to do, so I had to start all over again. It was at this point I went off to read some reviews, and one of the things that kept going back to me was that the game can put you in a fail state without telling you. You may have done something wrong, but you'll have no way of knowing until you start again, do something different, and realise that the previous way you were doing it wasn't the right way. But there's no way to know that unless you get frustrated, start again and try something else. But you also might have been doing things the correct way, and starting again is not what you want to do. Maybe you've just missed something. And it's this that constantly tickles away at your mind. Am I doing this right? Is this what I need to do? There's no way of knowing without repeated playthroughs. You'll know straight away based on that alone whether this is a game for you, and it's a shame that a point-and-click game can be so binary in how it turns people on and off. I have no patience at all for this kind of thing. Replaying a segment in the vague hope of solving something that seems unsolvable is the very definition of pain to me. This is what I mean when I say that the game almost becomes a metaphor of itself. It's conveying the story of people trapped for eternity in an abstract torture chamber, and sometimes it feels like you're right there with them, trapped in confusion and frustration while you try to work out what the hell it is you need to do. I eventually figured out that you can repurpose this rope, tie up your stepmother, inexplicably put her in your inventory, then also inexplicably put your wife in your inventory. I mean, Jesus, Gorister, are you wearing clown pants? You bury your wife, you use your mother-in-law as an energy source for the Zeppelin, and then you shoot a flare at a bar. Again, if you've not played the game, you'll be wondering how all of this makes any sense, and I've got to admit, it doesn't, really. I had to constantly look up tips when I was getting stuck because the puzzles are often so wildly out of sync with what a normal human person would do that you'll regularly sit in a stalemate. At one point, for instance, I gave this jackal my heart. I need my heart back. I could, for instance, kill this dude in the bar who keeps waffling on about a storm unless I feed him booze.
Let me pour you a drink. Let me pour you a drink. Let me pour you a drink. Let me pour you a...
But that's not the way to properly complete the level. You have to use a magnifying glass on a hunk of beef, which reveals that the organs are still inside, then use a knife to cut the heart out, and then give that to the jackal. Use a magnifying glass on beef? Are you serious? In what way would using the magnifying glass help to identify that the beef still had organs in it? This isn't even the worst of the puzzle designs, but it gives you some idea of just how obtuse things get.
The rules are very simple, but here's a quick recap. The object is to score 9 points on your quizzle stick, so the first to score 9 red blocks and 3 green blocks will go through to the next round. But if only one of you scores 9, or you both score over 5, then one of you plays for the quizzle chance, and the other gets their green bonus points halved.
Frustrations aside though, the tale of Gorrister is one that, once unpieced, is an interesting internal struggle. It tells the story of him, his wife, and the oppressive mother-in-law. It shows you how he feels guilt over his wife being locked away in an asylum, and how he blames himself for that, but it turns out it was all his mother-in-law's fault. And it does all of this in a world where you're flying a human-powered Zeppelin, and there's a meat locker behind a toilet flusher. There's not many games that can hit that level of abstract and also nail it. The problem with the game is the game. Our next tale is that of Ellen, who is sent to some sort of techno-pyramid, possibly representing the fact she was an engineer. She is annoying. I don't know any other way to describe it, but her dialogue wildly swings between nerdishly wisecracking.
So, how's the family? Read any good papyrus lately? You dirty rat. I'm gonna give it to you the way you give it to my sister. Watch it, statue baby, you'll go hoarse.
Being scared shitless of the colour yellow.
I've got to face the yellow.
Or general whining.
At last, water. How long's it been since I actually had a drink?
There's not a lot of cohesion in her character, compared to Gorrister, who is largely fleshed out and well understood. That could also be due to the fact that the game is hiding a pretty dark secret about Ellen, one which I wasn't expecting. You see, Ellen is terrified of the colour yellow, but she doesn't know why. She's also scared of enclosed spaces. You can see here, for example, in the main screen, that Am has her entrapped in a yellow box for eternity, which compared to the other members' torture boxes, looks a bit weak. You discover, however, after being transported to a lift section, why Ellen is so terrified. First, you use the control panel to discover her life through the years, a difficult life that was bound for success until personal tragedy hit, and then something worse happened. Ellen was raped by a man disguised as an engineer, and Am is using it against her. In a storytelling perspective, this is both surprising and unsurprising. It was surprising because I just didn't see it coming, and it's done in such a way that it doesn't necessarily feel exploitative. It was unsurprising because, well, Ellen is the only woman in the entire game, and writers just can't seem to help themselves when it comes to using rape as a shock tactic for dealing with something emotionally bad in a woman's life. The impact is also muted by just how quickly Ellen switches from terrified to blasé.
Oh!
Am gave me the chance to be with you forever. I waited in the sarcophagus until you arrived. What's a mere 100 years of waiting compared to an eternity of torturing you?
Don't count on it, you mother! So the sarcophagus was the way out of here.
Couple that with the fact she can just stick a blindfold on to bypass her fears. Another puzzle that is largely baffling because the blindfold itself is yellow and she initially runs away from it when you try to pick it up.
No, I can't. Gotta get out of here.
The game feels as though it's actively working against the story. Benny's the next character, and this is where things get so complicated. I practically had to follow a guide from start to finish to even get through it. Benny is someone who has been turned into a malformed beast who can barely walk. He has no way of speaking, and he's desperate for food. You find yourself in a village, and I'll cut a long story short here. Benny has to prove to some ghosts that he's not the same man he used to be by saving a child from a sacrifice lottery. Again, the impact of this is somewhat lost by this hilarious translation effort with the village chief. Remember, Benny can't talk, and the village chief doesn't even speak English.
Das Ramwan Bank. Latana Shama Holt. Nukom Vitastrawan.
The elder seems amazed that I would show compassion to the boy.
How did anyone know what was going on there? The village chief just instinctively knew that this bizarre ape man wanted to take his place. Whatever. The next story follows Nimdok, and if you thought rape was dark, don't worry, here's some Nazis doing experiments on children. Yeah, it goes there. Once again, though, the game steps up its puzzle solving to stupid levels, and I have to rely on a hefty handful of tips to even get anywhere. You enter this operating theatre, and the way forward is to kill this doctor and then steal some ether. You also need to take a jar of eyes and hide it in a box in order to smuggle it out to a compound to stick the eyes in a golem. You bring the golem to life and transfer its power over to the Lost Tribe. I'll say that in inverted commas, it's pretty clearly a stand-in for the Jewish people. They then use it to kill you. Nimdok's tale is a bit of a weird one. He discovers through a series of events that he was one of Dr. Mengele's doctors who experimented on Jewish people during the regime. But it also turns out that Nimdok is Jewish and he sold his family down the river. He feels guilty about it, but there's also not a great deal of a redemption arc here because Nimdok has absolutely no memory of the atrocities he's committed until the end of the segment when he looks in a mirror and remembers. It's like watching an old man with dementia most of the time.
What am I to do? What is the purpose of such a procedure? What is the nature of this serum? What is Dr. Mengele's position? What is your function?
If somebody doesn't remember doing something heinous, does that absolve their actions? No. When they finally do remember, does that put them in any better position? No. And there's no real explanation for Nimdok's sudden turn away from the regime. He's already in a state where he's saying, what I did here was wrong. There's no growth of character, there's no proper realization. He's already shocked and appalled as soon as we start playing as him. Last and probably least, let's be honest, it's Ted. Ted is the ex-husband of Ellen, who he still loves very much, but she's apparently dying due to her wicked stepmother. She's also obsessed with mirrors. Everyone is obsessed with mirrors. This one is so bloody complicated to work out, I just used a guide to finish it off, and I still didn't do it right. It involves summoning a demon, talking to angels and devils, and generally, it just baffled me from start to finish. I genuinely hated everything about this section. With all that done, and with me not getting the good ending now because I didn't do Ted's section properly, and because I was fully done with the game at this point, we get to the last segment, and I'm not even sure what to tell you is going on here. It is so abstract and confusing. It boils all of the game's previous nonsense into mega nonsense. Trying to work out what to do in this last segment of the game is like trying to run through water in a dream. You go through each of the characters, you do some mad stuff in a brainy type area, you have these totems and you use them on stuff and then the characters die and I just don't know. Chalk it up to me being completely dumb, but I had no idea what the game was getting at in this section. By the time I'd finally killed all 5 of them off and gotten the bad ending, I was just glad to see the back of it. I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream is good, but it's also terrible. It pushes the point-and-click adventure genre, and to be fair, gaming in general, toward a more adult tone that isn't predilected toward titillation. It's adult in tone in that it touches on things that are difficult to deal with. Things that are painful and depressing, and personally I think that's a good thing, especially when you consider the year that the game released. But as a game, God, I hate it. I hate everything about it. I hate the puzzles, the clunky UI, a large portion of the voice acting. Over the course of hours, I went from being intrigued to infuriated, either because the game completely locked me out of pushing the story forward with no way for me to know if it had done that or not, or because the solutions were so mind-crushingly nonsensical I just had no way to get my monkey brain to hit the right buttons to move things on. It's said that Harlan Ellison wanted the good ending to be an impossible achievement, something that players wouldn't be able to actually get in the game, and they'd find it years later. Cyberdreams talked him down from that, but still made a game in which getting the good ending, without a decade of trial and error, is as good as impossible anyway. There's definitely something fitting about that, but unfortunately it's just not fitting for me. Would I recommend the game? For the vast majority, no. Not before knowing what you're getting yourself into, because there's not a great deal of joy to be had here from the game itself, and while I enjoyed the story it told for the most part, there were a number of missteps that stopped me from truly getting on board with it. If you can put up with 100 years of pain for the chance of salvation, then maybe there's something you'll love here, but for me, no. I'd rather read the book with a spike up my arse.